I turned 70 this year and I'm still playing, and I am 25 again when I get out there. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do that, and I would encourage people rather than hone your craft in your back bedroom and whatever, it's hone it in front of some people and engage, because you'll know whether you're doing right or not.
I'm Sandy Smollins, and this is Four Strings and the Truth, where we shine a light on bass players who've had an outsized influence on the music that came after them. The low-enders we're speaking with carved out a new vocabulary for rock bass. They freed the instrument from the tyranny of sticking to the root notes. The bass became primary to the songs, foundational. The tunes simply couldn't exist without them. Today, I have the distinction of conversing with Horace Panter, a.k.a. Sir Horace Gentleman, the bass architect for ska progenitors, the Specials. By mashing together up-tempo reggae music with the politics and vehemence of punk, the Coventry-based Specials created an entirely new and sustaining genre with the release of their self-titled debut album in October of 1979. In fact, they put that album out on their own label, Two Tone, started by Specials keyboardist and creative force Jerry Dammers, and they secured a modest fund to issue singles and albums by stylistic fellow travelers like The Selector, Madness, and The Beat, now better known as The English Beat. These days, everyone from No Doubt to Real Big Fish to Rancid credit the Specials as sparking their own musical paths. And a new generation of third-wave ska bands continue to light up clubs and festivals around the world. After a series of reunion tours and recordings, the Specials are no longer active in the wake of the untimely death of singer Terry Hall in December of 2022. For Horace's part, he's pivoted to a dual artist career. As a visual artist with a number of gallery shows under his belt and works available online, and as a bassist in several regional groups. Most importantly, as you'll hear, Horace is every bit the gentleman he was nicknamed. So, let's pick it up. Horace Panter, welcome to the podcast. You are truly, in my opinion, one of the bassists who changed music, and it is a pleasure to speak to you after having been a fan of yours probably since the Saturday Night Live performance the Specials did in April of 1980. Mind-blowing. And I went back and listened to it recently, and it still sounds amazing.
Burn Rose knows don't argue!
It was extraordinary. It was recorded at a weird time in the Specials' history, because we'd done our first American tour, we'd gone home exhausted, and then the record company were hustling for the next record, please. I think we'd recorded Rat Race, I don't think we'd released it, but we were in pieces, and it's like, why have we got to go all the way to New York to play this silly song, blah, 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 blah. So we did, and we were very angry, and it came across. But then we just went back to England and forgot about it and just got on with attempting to write our second album and get it recorded. And I totally forgot about it. But then when I was in Special Beat, this was 1990 with Rankin Roger, we went to America and we played to this new legion of ska fans that had grown up. And they all said, wow, we saw the Specials on Saturday Night Live, because it got repeated and people used to phone up and go, hey, the Specials are on Saturday Night Live this evening. And we never knew that it had had that impact. It was like this little pebble that had been dropped, and like the ripples just became huge. I just found that was really ironic. It wasn't until 10 years later, like I say, when I found out that it had surfaced.
In your amazing memoir, the 2007 book, Ska for Life, appreciate the pun, you've kind of very low-key mentioned that appearance. What I really like about the book is that in some cases you just republished elements of either your touring diary or a letter you wrote to some of your friends about what the tour was like. And I can't say it sounded like you guys had a lot of fun in America. I didn't realize how big your American touring experience was. I thought Saturday Night Live was the first time you guys set foot on these shores, but you were old hand by then.
Yes, I think I mentioned in the book that we did more good by playing Saturday Night Live than we did for slugging around America for 2.5 months previous. But hey, it was our first time in America, and it was exciting. All the music that I grew up on either was played by Americans or people who would have liked to have been Americans. So yeah, it was a great place to visit. And we went all over the place. So we had, the experience of New Orleans and the Midwest, and then of course the coasts and blah, 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 But I think it didn't do the band any good. I think is what, I personally, I enjoyed it. I had a great time, but it wasn't good for the band. Definitely not.
The impression I got was that the specials, the way that is put forth in the book is that's 3.5 years of the first generation, 78 to 81, really, right? Burned bright, but it was almost like the energy you saw on stage at the Saturday Night Live performance, it's hard to keep that together for a period of time, especially when you have essentially at least 7 band members. As someone who's been in a band of 4 people or 5 people, and it's really hard to make decisions with that amount of people, I can't even imagine what the conversations and the alliances within the 7-piece core members of the specials was like.
Yes, it was strange. Groups are all about people skills, aren't they? Music is really quite infinitesimal, really, I think, when it comes down to it. It's all about people skills. I think when we started, we were all facing in the right direction, and we all had this mission that we were on. And Jerry wrote great songs, and he had really good ideas, and we were like, yep, we just got behind it and went, and that was it. Fame is a strange thing. It's a very powerful aphrodisiac, but it can also turn you stupid as well. It's difficult. I always have this theory that being famous basically exaggerates what you were before you were famous. So if drunk before you were famous, you're a big drunk, now you're famous. But consequently, if you're shy and quite reserved, you become perhaps even more retiring once you've got adulation going on and all that kind of stuff. So everybody sort of split off into different directions emotionally as well as other stuff. It was a very difficult band to keep going after when we started recording that second record, definitely.
I definitely got that impression from the book. And I've read a lot of autobiographies or people's memoirs from being in band stuff. You're quite a writer. You're very concise. It's a beautifully edited book as well. There's no wasted sentences. It's almost similar to the way you play bass.
Well, that's very kind of you, Sandy, yes.
There's something very musical about the writing. And I was reading it for research for the show, but it was a pleasure. I got through it in like a day and a half.
It's an easy read. Yeah, it's not War and Peace, no.
No, but it's not fluff either. And talking about your musical sort of coming up and your education, the people in the specials, you said in one of your interviews, we knew how to play. It's not that usual punk rock story of we were kind of all learning. People knew their way around their instruments. It wasn't amateur hour. You guys were starting.
We knew how to play. We were 5 or 6 years older than the punks. Terry was an original punk. Terry was like 19, whereas we were like mid-20s. I was brought up in the 60s listening to the Spencer Davis Group and the Small Faces and all this stuff. The first band I ever saw live was Led Zeppelin at the Royal Albert Hall in London when I was 15.
Wow.
But I'd been in like show bands. So yeah, we all kind of knew our way around our instruments. I'm not saying we were virtuosos by any stretch, but it wasn't like the punk bands that were coming out of Coventry, whereas you knew 1.5 chords and formed a band, which I thought was great. The energy that came out of that music was amazing. It was really good, Sandy. But yeah, we knew what we were doing musically.
Why did you first pick up the bass versus a guitar or anything else?
I had a 6-string, a nylon string 6-string. Couldn't play it. But then when I was 11, I saw the Searchers on television. And Tony Jackson stood in the middle and it looked just so cool with this big semi-acoustic, whatever it was. I don't know, Gibson EB2 or something, or Epiphone, I'm not sure. And I like, wow, that's okay, that looks good. But bass was great because it was 4 strings, so you didn't have to play chords, one note at a time. There's this thing in the 60s, the clever kid was the lead guitarist. His mate was the rhythm guitarist because he taught him how to play. And the bloke who really wanted to play, but perhaps wasn't very good, was handed the bass guitar because it was easier. And the kid who nobody liked next door was the drummer. So in a way, but I'd always wanted to be, I can play a little bit of 6-string guitar, but not a lot. I can't bar chords. But I'm happy being a bass guitarist. That's all I really wanted to do.
When you were learning the material that you were playing before the specials with the show band, with Breaker and such, how did you go about learning those songs? Just by ear? Were you reading music?
No, I wasn't reading music. I was taught how to read like chord sheets and simple rudiments like this is a triad, that's an octave. And if you're playing a seventh, you need to include that note there in the scale. So very, very rudimentary knowledge of music. If someone gave me a sheet of some dots, I'd come back the next day and I'd have a vague idea. But I think the biggest regret is that I never learned to read music.
How do you think that's held you back?
I think some of the bass lines might have been a bit more interesting. I think I would have been able to play with some different people. I don't know. It's funny, when the specials reformed, our keyboard player, Nikolai Tolp Larsen's an incredible musician. We'd be in the studio and I put something down and go, look, Horace, that's great, but don't play that note there because it doesn't work with the chord. And I didn't know that. So I felt a little bit like, oh, okay, all right. Kind of inferior because I wasn't versed in that musicality. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense, but maybe the fact that you didn't know that and the note you chose to play at that moment is why you've created these, in my opinion, very eternal, lasting bass lines.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think you're right. I mean, a lot of the old blues guys that I listened to, I mean, they wouldn't have known that. They'd have just played the walking bass like that. I don't know. Does Tommy Shannon read music? Did Keith Ferguson read music? I don't know, but they rock. So, you know, it obviously didn't do them any harm.
What I found really interesting, too, is how you just discussed how, and I believe it was Linville mostly, gave you sort of crash courses in how to listen to and play, because the specials were playing originally a slower, more closer to reggae than ska early on. The impression I got from your book was that you learned from your bandmates. They kind of taught you how to listen.
Yes, it was difficult. I knew reggae because every year there was at least one reggae single in the charts, so whether it was Uptown Top Ranking or something by Desmond Decker or whatever. So I knew about it, but I'd never considered playing it. But in reggae, all the rules of music are turned on their head, aren't they? I maintain that reggae is like African drumming, but on Western instruments. And it always used to confuse me when people will go, hey, you and Brad are such a great rhythm section, but hey, this is reggae. Everyone's the rhythm section. The keyboards play congas, you know, the rhythm guitar is the metronome, that keeps the thing going. The drummer's feet keep time, his hands improvise. And the bass plays a totally different role. The bass plays a melody or the nearest that sort of links the vocal line to the music. So it was extraordinary to do that. But it took Linval and keyboard player from the Selector, Desmond Brown, to come round my little pokey flat and play Dennis Brown tunes on my little stereo and go, look, this is how it works. So, yeah, I had reggae lessons. I sort of took it on board, but it wasn't till I went to like a Jamaican house party that I really understood it, when you sort of stood in this room and your trousers flapped because the bass was so loud, you know.
The sound
like,
system.
Oh, yeah, I understand. Okay, this is how it's supposed to work.
And then once you started playing that style of music, did you then widen your aperture in terms of the basses that you were listening to inspired by? Did you then start listening to more bass players from reggae and other related music?
Yes, I suppose so. Yes, I started listening to the early Fleetwood Mac stuff, the Peter Green stuff. That was great. John McVie and Mick Fleetwood were great. But then, like most sort of long-haired, denim-clad youths in England in the mid-'60s, here comes Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce and Ginger Baker. And it's like, how on earth can just three people make all that noise? The second solo in Crossroads is absolutely astonishing. Everybody just takes off, but it just works. So it took me a long time to realise that you don't have to be as good as Jack Bruce to be a working bass player. But then along comes Jaco Pastorius, who kind of rewrites the whole thing. But I always wondered why it was that I always danced whenever a Tamla Motown record came on, whereas ordinary British pop songs that were in the charts just made me sort of still sit in my seat. And obviously that was James Jamerson, who was funky as well as jazzy. I suppose he's everyone's ground zero, isn't he? But I also dug Booker T and the MGs.
Yeah.
And Donald Duck Dunn, I suppose, because it's like, hey, you don't have to be Jack Bruce to make something rock. But it took me a long time to actually get off that sort of virtuoso thing and the fact that I'll never be Mark King or whatever, no, because Mark King is Mark King. Why would you want to do that? But I'm very happy attempting to be Donald Duck.
Yeah.
But I got into blues subsequently. I like a lot more. And I really rate people like Keith Ferguson and Tommy Shannon. Keith Ferguson is great. He only had one sound and he wouldn't change it when they were recording. But he was great.
You mean in terms of his tone?
Yeah. He'd bring his big 2x15 into the studio and they'd say, well, can't we just DI it? Go, no, this is how I play. I want to sound like this. And they could very rarely capture it on the desk, much to everyone's frustration. But hey, he was great. It was always, I could make people dance. The bass is what people dance to. And I learned how you had to work with the drummer. I learned that pretty early on, that it's a team effort. I think when you're learning, you're so busy trying to put your fingers in the right place and make the song work in your head. But it's like you've got to listen as well as play. And it took me a while to figure that out. But once I started playing with a drummer who could play, it was like, okay, this is good. So it's not like, who are your favourite bass players? I don't know. I have favourite rhythm sections. I liked the people who locked together.
When I started doing the show and I was talking to some people, I have a lot of friends who are like rock critics. Well, and they're like, oh, well, are you going to talk to so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so? And I go, those are all incredible musicians and incredible players. But I'm really looking for people whose playing has had an impact in the sense of how the songs come out and what you remember about the songs. God bless Les Claypool. And I would love to be able to move my thumb the way he does and play the way he does. But to me, he's an outlier in almost the same way that John Entwistle was. They're lead bassists. In The Who, at least, every instrument was a lead. Yes. They all played lead, right?
Those guys, the Les Claypools and they're like the cutting edge. There has to be a cutting edge, isn't there?
Sure.
So I think, yeah, fantastic. That's great. But I think the thing was, when you're impressionable, when you're like sort of 15 and 16 and you want to be a bass player, when you get your first car, you want to drive it as fast as you can, don't you? Until you realise that, this is scary. I'll stick to 35, thank you. But I think once you get over that, if you're still alive, but then I'm very happy going dang 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 dang. On Time Is Tight. I don't need to do anything else. One of the guys who I listened to originally that really influenced me was Andy Fraser.
Oh, from Free.
Yeah. Now, he was musical because he could play piano. He knew his thirds and his fifths and all that kind of business. But some of his bass lines are really simple because he could have done all sorts of really amazing melodic stuff. But no, he just sat with just that one note and he locked in with Simon Kirke. And that rhythm section was so funky. Oh, really, really, really good. And I think people have forgotten Free, now.
Yeah, they're not spoken about in the same breath as a lot of the classic British anthemic rock bands.
Sure, yeah.
If you think about All Right Now, that bass line it's so basic and...
Because there's no bass in the verse.
Right.
The bass only comes in on the chorus, and then there's that like ba-dum ba-dum bum ba 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 bing bong bing, which the solo goes over. That's amazing. That's really cool. The last single they ever did was called A Little Bit of Love, and the bass on that is insane. The band have played, and he sort of comes in at the end of the session and just plonks away on it, but it works. It's really, really cool. He's a very unique vision of what a bass should be.
I would say there was definitely a dividing line in the Specials fame in the U.S. before and after Saturday Night Live. I really do think that was a watershed moment for you guys. Mm-hmm. Yet you were filling clubs on the tour before that, in the U.S., I'm saying.
Yeah.
What was it like then? What was the touring circuit in the U.S. like in the late 70s, before the advent of college rock and college radio? What was it like in the late 70s, early 80s, touring in America? How was the circuit?
There are a lot of universities. So you were cool. I remember there was a rock club out near, it wasn't in Chicago, but it was out that way. And obviously, and there was like this sort of rock tribute band on with us beforehand. And it was their gig originally. And we were just sort of bumped on it because they did 2 sets for some silly reason. They were called Teaser, and it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen in my life. They were like Spinal Tap, for real. And it was, are you ready to rock and roll? And of course, there's all these kids, in all their pork pie who come to see us, and they were all going, no. And it was hilarious. And I met someone a few years ago who was in the audience at that gig. I'm absolutely thrilled to have done that. So it was weird. Henry Rollins tells this lovely anecdote that is like when Black Flag started out, it's like they were armed with machetes and they were chopping down trees to make paths to get to these places, whereas now it's an 8-lane highway with rest stops and garages and stuff. It wasn't too far removed from that. But we were the hip new thing from England, so people who got their imported copies of the New Musical Express and Melody Maker would go, okay, I better go and see these guys, because everybody in England is jumping up and down about them. And I was absolutely thrilled. When we started off, the first week was supporting the Police, and we started in New Orleans. We'd played the Warehouse in New Orleans, and there was a carload of kids who'd come from Texas to see us. They'd driven 8 hours. And I was like absolutely gobsmacked. I could not believe that somebody would do that. Apparently it's no big deal, but I live in England. You can drive from one end to the other in 8 hours, more or less. But that they would drive 8 hours to see me and play for 30 minutes opening for the Police in New Orleans was absolutely incredible.
When you're in an alternative band or an underground band, college kids are the few times you can actually get paid.
Well, especially later in general public. In Special Beat, they were always my favourite gigs. The small town, Athens, Georgia, Columbus, Ohio, Ann Arbor, Michigan, all those places. Because downtown is small and it's like you've got the whole place at your disposal, and there's always a laundrette. There's always a really good second-hand bookstore. There's always a really good second-hand record store, and there's at least one thrift shop. You know what I mean? So you got all the bases covered if you're a touring musician living on nothing, It's great.
Image was one of the reasons why I think you guys made such an impression. And I think to a certain point, you can say this about The Clash too, is they looked like a band on stage. They were very deliberate about the way they dressed. So image was really important, but I feel like that's because you guys were trying to present a united front, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it always seemed like it came after the music. I mean, you guys woodshed it with the music, with the songs. Like, I know it seems like by the time you got into the studio to record the first album, you'd already demoed a bunch of those songs already.
Yeah, some of those songs we've been playing for a couple of years, which is very different to the second album, whereas they were written in the morning, routined in the afternoon and recorded that night, some of them, and it sounds like it as well, to be honest. But yeah, we were inspired by punk, obviously. The energy of the special show was based on spending like 3 weeks opening for The Clash in 1978, where we sort of sat backstage and just went, listen, if we're going to be any good, we've got to be at least as good as this. So that was sort of in the back of our minds, but also to sort of distance ourselves from the sort of the leather jacket safety pin thing, because punk was dying on its arse then in 1978. And the ska thing was obviously related back to the mod thing. And you could buy second-hand suits up Gosford Street in Coventry. The suit that I'm wearing on the cover of that first Specials album cost me £6.50.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it cost me more than that to get it altered.
Do you still have it?
No. I ceremonially threw it away when I left the band, in a fit of pique, What I mean? But yes, you're right. The image was obviously a big deal to separate us from what had come before, but also to create the movement. That was the whole thing with two-tone records. We wanted bands that were like us, so we could be a movement. So we found the Madness, we found the English Beat, whatever, the Selector. And everybody, we all played on the same bill. And so we became this sort of unified movement, which gave us a lot more impetus, I think.
Yeah, I hadn't realized to what degree that when you first got your big record deal, you also got funding to be able to release other artists. That is a forward-looking strategy. You saw Greg Ginn do it with SST. A lot of people took their band and the success of the band. Something happens in hip hop a lot, and then create a whole label out of it, and then bring up your peers.
Well, I think that it goes back to Tamla Motown. You listen to that first drum fill, and that's a Tamla Motown. Just the sound of the thing. And I think we wanted to do something similar. to have like an English Tamil or Motown. So something that had like a label identity, not just a visual thing with the 2 black and white checks and the 2-tone man and all that sort of stuff, but something that combined elements of reggae with elements of punk. We had a demo from UB40. It was really good. It was excellent. It was King, Food for Thought, all that sort of stuff. But we didn't release it because they were a straight down the line reggae band, bless them. They were ever so good. But it wasn't what 2-tone was looking for. He didn't combine reggae with stuff.
Right, like sort of more intense, the intensity of post-punk and punk rock and stuff. Would it be wrong to say that you only play with your fingers, or do you ever pick up a pick? Or
no, was it Ozzy Osbourne's a bass player says, "Picks are for noses." No, I can't hold the thing for more than a verse and a half. I have to sort of put it down. No, I think on a recording date I might be able to do it. But no, I use my fingers. I play really hard. When we're doing sound checks and the sound crew would like line check my bass and they say, "Horace, there's no point us doing this because when you come along, you always sort of play it totally differently than we do," because I play really hard. Because I never used to want to turn my bass up particularly, because if I played it as loud as everybody else in the specials wanted, no, you wouldn't be able to hear anything else. You know what I mean? So there's a constant volume battle. So I would sort of have on stage quite a middly, toppy sound,
right,
to compensate. Instead of turning it up, I'd just play it a lot harder, which has been a bit of a rod for my back because that's how I play now. I've owned 4 Fender Mustang basses. I really like the idea of a little guitar.
You're going to the short scales now?
I play it too hard. It's either that or I've got to learn to play softer, and I can't do that. I'm far too old to change now. You know what I mean? So
you were playing early on Precisions, and then you mentioned in your book how you went ahead and bought some Fender Telecasters. I have a 73 Fender Telecaster. It's one of the heaviest items I own in my house. I'm telling you, I had to switch to a short scale recently just because it's like, after a while, that gigantic neck, like the weight of the body and stuff, it's cool sonically, but it does take a toll.
Yeah. I've got a 74 Telecaster. I've had it for about 4 or 5 years. And the neck was like a telegraph pole. It was awful. A friend of mine shaved it down. And it's, but yes, you're right. But what a sound. It's only one sound, but yeah, it's pretty cool. No, nowadays, the big criteria is how much does it weigh?
I think that's common with a lot of people. You're seeing a lot more contemporary bassists be comfortable with the short scale thing. I think people are realizing there shouldn't be such hard and fast rules about things in terms of like the instrument you play. I should talk. This podcast's title is 4 Strings and the Truth. Now, does that mean I'm only interviewing people who play 4-string basses? It seems to sort of be that way, but I just spoke to Graham Maybe with Joe Jackson.
Yes, Joe Jackson.
Of like 40-something years. And he's like, my main bass is a 5-string Ibanez now. And I was like, it's okay. You're welcome here, brother. There is something beautiful about the classic simplicity of the 4 strings and having to solve all your musical problems with 4 strings. And a big part of that is the sound. Everyone's like, well, why does everyone play Fender basses? Like, because they fucking sound great in every setting. You can literally plug one into the recording board without anything in front of it, and you will have an actionable, mixable take.
Yes, when the specials reformed, I was playing Gibson Thunderbird. I love Gibson Thunderbirds. It's just such a beautiful piece of design. And the one that I have is nice and light. The neck is like a jazz. It's really good. And I had a Fender Jazz as a spare. And one day the stage manager sort of sidled up to me and sort of tapped me and said, Horace, if you don't mind, we'd really like it if you use the Fender Jazz as your main bass. Because, as you say, at a festival stage, when you haven't got time to set up the band, you know that with a Fender, you just buff, that's it, that's going to work. And I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me, 9 months ago? So I went out and bought an American standard one and all that kind of stuff. And then a couple of years ago, Fender, bless them, gave me 2 for nothing. The new Professional 2 series.
Oh.
Yeah, crazy. Here I am, an old age pensioner, and Fender finally give me stuff for nothing. Where have you been 40 years, for Christ's sake? And I still have my original 1972 Fender Precision that I bought in 1975. That's the one I used on the first Specials album and on those Bonkers tours in 1979.
That's the other thing. They're good on stage. When the skinheads jump on stage for the last couple of songs, a Fender will be your last line of defense. But you've always used passive electronics, passive pickups.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just nice to hear the natural sound of the finger hitting the string.
Yeah.
You're playing up to this day, right? From my understanding, you're in several different blues combos.
Yeah, the specials aren't working, of course, now because Terry died. But I'm playing with a guy called Steve Walwyn, who up until recently was the longest-serving guitar player in Dr. Feelgood. Wow. He was in the band when Lee Brillo was still alive. He lives just down the road from me. I've known him for forever. It's a power trio, and it's just blues rock. It's great. The drummer, a Coventry guy, he's the same age as us, Ted Duggan, he just uses a bass drum and a snare drum, hi-hat and two cymbals. So it's really minimal. You know, there's like the AC30, my new lightweight gear, and this minimal drum kit. And it's great. It's such fun. About 10 years ago, I really got into country music, and I formed a traditional Nashville-sounding country band in Coventry. It was great. We couldn't get arrested, but it was great fun. That's finished. But again, that changed the way I play because you don't have an ego in that music. You serve the song. And if it's root and fifth, that's what you need to do.
Which is like 90% of country bass, right?
Amen. But through that, I met some guys who play Cajun and Zydeco. And I've been doing that, which is fantastic because that's all the musics that I love, all played at the same time. It's funk, it's blues, it's country, and it's got all these weird times, not weird time signatures, but it'll change key in like half a bar, all that sort of stuff. Brilliant.
And now the stuff that you're playing with your primary or your blues trio, is that originals or classics or?
It started off as classics, but we're in the studio on Monday, actually. We're going into Woodbine Studios, which is the studio where Ghost Town was recorded.
Oh, how cool.
So we're slowly compiling something for some sort of physical release. Ain't no one going to buy a brand new BMW out of that, That's called the Dirt Road Band.
Dirt Road Band, okay. And that you guys are tipped to have a release next year, right?
Yeah.
This stuff that you're working on?
Yeah.
Great. And that'll be released independently?
Yes, yeah, I suppose so. But that's just great fun to play live. I want to play music that I like with people that I like. I think I can afford to do that now. There was an interview I read it years and years ago with Robert Fripp from King Crimson.
Sure. And
he said that there are 3 factors that keep bands together, and that bands can exist on only 2 of those factors, but not 1. And it was liking the people, liking the money, and liking the music. So if you like the money and the people, you could still function, even though you hated the music. If you loved the music and you loved the money, but you could still function, even though you hated the people. Whatever, that wasn't my experience. But I thought that was a really interesting theory about groups and how groups stay together.
And then nowadays, though, would you say that you primarily identify as an artist? You've said art is your solo album. Is that how you spend the bulk of your time, or?
Well, when I'm not playing music, I'm painting pictures. I'm at Jerry Dammer's art college.
Right.
I've got a degree in it. 3 of the specials have degrees in fine art. John Bradbury, Jerry Dammers and me. And art was always a big deal. It would be, hey, we're going to New York. Great, I can go into the Museum of Modern Art or the Guggenheim or the Whitney. And when the specials reformed, I had some downtime, so I started painting pictures. And it just sort of ballooned from there. I don't have one working as opposed to the other. I couldn't not play music. I couldn't not paint pictures. I think the 2 complement themselves. Yes, you're right. Playing music, I'm a team player. I'm a bass player. I need to lock in with a drummer. I need to work with a keyboard player or guitarist or whatever. But the art is my solo album. It stands or falls by my efforts only. And at the moment, it's going pretty well. But I always knew the specials weren't going to last forever. So I thought this is something that I can fall back on. And I'm far too old to jump off drum risers anyway.
Well, but you also had a really interesting portion of your career after the specials. You went back to school and became an instructor.
I was a school teacher. I was the art teacher in a special needs school. It certainly was good fun. I mean, they were very challenging pupils, but that went with the territory. But art was good because if you couldn't read or write too good, you could still achieve as well as people who could read or write through pictures, through painting, through drawing, through making things. And I loved it. Plus the fact that as a self-employed musician, once a month, this sum of money would appear in my bank account, and that was incredible. I hadn't had that. We were able to upgrade where we lived, buy a better house and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that was fantastic.
You moved recently, right?
Yeah, 4 years ago, we moved out of Coventry. I now live in the country. I live in a little village. It's half an hour south of Coventry.
I was going to say, because you're not be too far from Coventry if you're doing a lot of jamming.
I still go in from time to time.
Yeah, no, Coventry looms so large in the specials mythology. And from what I've seen, it feels like there's definitely sort of a West Coast pop art influence to a lot of the things that you do now with your visual art. I encourage people to check out, the website's Horace Panter Art, is that correct?
That's right, horacepanterart.com.
Yeah, and I encourage people to check it out. There's some really interesting series, the whole cassette series and everything. If you hadn't told me that the person making this art was in some way related to music or a musician, I might have been able to glean that from some of the way some of the stuff comes out.
I like to keep the two things pretty much separate, apart from the cassette series, I suppose, because some of them, they're from recording studios.
They're labeled too, right?
Yeah.
That's so fantastic. You know, you and Claire have been together for 40 plus years. You talk about meeting her in your book back in the 80s, right?
Yeah, she came on the road. She knew us back then, which was cool. And we are still very happily married, thank you very much. She's not here at present.
How many musician marriages have lasted 40 years?
Yeah, cool.
And then you have children as well?
I have a son, and I've recently handed a granddaughter, which is pretty good. I wasn't expecting that, but yeah, she's great. That's got a lot of fun.
Oh, that's sweet. And then your son plays as well, right?
I always introduce him as the musician of the family. He learned piano. So he reads, he is the musician. He's the one who says, Dad, you should be playing a seventh there or something like that. He plays piano and sings. Yeah, but he studied that at university. He knows his stuff.
So what would you say to the 15-year-old future Horace Panthers sitting in their bedrooms like I was, plugging their bass? I didn't even have an amp. I plugged it into the stereo that I got for my bar mitzvah to try to figure out how to play Clash and special songs. What do you say to that person these days? What's the best way for them to really learn and move forward as musicians or as bassists?
A gig is worth 100 rehearsals. Well, 10 rehearsals. I would encourage performance. It's different, Sandy. It's totally different now. Equipment is a lot easier to come by. It's cheaper. On the internet, there's all sorts of lessons. Crikey. And you have all these 9-year-old virtuoso bass players who are like Louis Johnson or whatever. You know, I didn't really learn to play proficiently till I was, 18, 19, really. So it's a lot easier to learn to play. On the downside, I just think that the music industry is just collapsed. In terms of creative, making music and getting it out to people. I wouldn't like to be 18 with a bunch of good songs and a guitar, because I just think you have so much more to do. Because not only have you got to look good, sing good, but you've got to do all your social media stuff and all this palaver. I think that the main enjoyment out of playing music is performing it. That's my experience of it. I turned 70 this year and I'm still playing. And I am 25 again when I get out there. It's a wonderful thing to be able to do that. And I would encourage people, rather than, hone your craft in your back bedroom and whatever, it's hone it in front of some people and engage, because you'll know whether you're doing right or not. And also that gives you a confidence as well. It's character building. You go out and you do a shit gig and it's like, okay, you got two choices. You can get back on the horse or you can walk away. So you make the decision to get back on the horse. And I think you become a better person for it. Yeah, that's a bit preachy. I didn't mean to be preachy.
No, that's a great answer. I love these little hooks of advice and stuff.
And you've got to have a good song. It's all very well being able to play like John McLaughlin or whatever, but where's the song, Right. But that's always going to be there. I've heard some great songwriters, in sort of the Americana stuff. James McMurtry, are you aware of him?
Fantastic. Yep.
Wow, those songs are great. Who have I been listening to recently? Drive-By Truckers.
Love them.
Patterson Hood and Mike Cooley. Their songs are very, very different, but they're really, really good. And they're a great rock and roll band as well.
They really are.
So, yeah, I think thinking about it, as miserable as I can be, rock and roll's in pretty good hands, because there are people like that who are going out and playing.
I I know this is old hat for the UK, but there's something called Riot Fest in America, which is...
It's in Chicago. Yeah, we did it. And like punk rock bowling. Yeah.
And punk rock bowling.
Yeah, we did it in
Vegas.
We've done it in Asbury Park.
Right, I saw you in Asbury Park.
And then we did it in Las Vegas as well.
Yeah, it started as a Vegas thing, and then the Stone Pony in Asbury Park, incredible, said, okay, well, we want to do it here too. The day you guys played, I think it was like Buzzcocks as well, and like Leftover Crack, was that the same bill?
Right, I can't remember.
Oh, Charles Bradley. Yeah, I think it was
Charles Bradley. And lots of bands that all sounded the same.
Yeah, there were a couple of those, I think. But anyways, that was such a pleasure.
Watching the girls go by, spending money on. Sleep all day.
Well, listen, do you have anything else you'd like to share with this audience of bassists and musicians and anything I haven't asked you?
No, see, I don't listen to an awful lot of contemporary stuff, but I listen to people who either died or are not very well. Fabulous Thunderbirds. I'm going back to blues and just basic stuff. So if you like, the older I'm getting, the more basic the style that I'm playing. I'm very happy to do that. I've left that whole sort of virtuoso thing behind, not that I was ever part of it in the first place. So no, and I still really enjoy locking in with a drummer and playing in really tiny places. I think that's the essence of the music that I play. It was made for drinking to. It was made for ignoring, almost like. It was just music in the background. I'm really enjoying doing that.
Is there one bass line from the Specials material that you point to and go, I'm really proud of that one, or that one really...
Well, and I suppose it's got to be Nightclub, hasn't it? That's my moment to shine in the band. I love playing that. But I really liked International Jet Set because that really pushed envelopes. We played it in the Reform band. Nobody liked listening to it. The audience were like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. But I love playing it. It's great. And I think with the new material that we did a song called Vote For Me. I'm really proud of that. That's my bass line right there. But the version that was on the album has a gorgeous trombone solo that Tim Smart, our trombonist, played. I'm really happy with that one as well. So there's 3 for you.
All righty. Well, thank you so much for your time today. You've been really generous with it. It's getting late over there. I'm sure.
Whoa, yeah. Hey, it's time to go for a drink.
Friday night. It's time to
Friday night.
You got some jamming to do. Thank you again so much, Sir Horace.
Okay.
What did I tell you? He's a true gentleman indeed. And we're really grateful to Horace for joining us on 4 Strings and the Truth. There's links to his music and his art in our show notes. And keep an ear out for the new album he'll be putting out with his buddies in the Dirt Road Band. Hey, if you're digging these shows, please do subscribe and rate the series wherever you listen. Spotify has an area where you can ask questions or make comments. Feel free to do that. I can't promise that we're going to honor every request for bassists to be featured, but we'll do our best to give them fair consideration. And anyways, thanks for getting this far, listening to the whole episode, and we hope you keep listening.
Audiation.